Hey everyone, this is Tom Salemi. Welcome back to the DeviceTalks Weekly Podcast. It's great to have you here. Our focus this week is surgical robotics and technology. We're going to speak with Megan Rosengarten of Medtronic. She's the head of the surgical robotics group. She spoke with my good friend and colleague, Sean Whooley, about Hugo's securing CE Mark. So Hugo is now commercial, and Megan will bring us up to speed. A little later on, I'm going to have a great conversation with Ivan Tornos, the COO of Zimmer Biomet. Zimmer Biomet, of course, has the ROSA robot, but we talked about so much more. In fact, Ivan said he doesn't think that Zimmer should be seen as a surgical robotics company, but more as a tech company. So great and far-ranging conversation. Lots going on over there at Zimmer Biomet. But before we begin this episode, I want to bring in Mike Sanford, Vice President of Business Development at Nisha Medical Technologies. Nisha is the sponsor of this episode of Device Talks. Mike, tell us about Nisha Medical Technologies.
Tom, Nisha Medical Technologies is essentially a full-service contract product design and manufacturing partner to the minimally invasive surgical market. Our footprint spans the globe with development and manufacturing resources in North America, Europe, and Asia. We specialize very, very heavily in mechanical and electromechanical surgical instrumentation. We also carry a pretty robust bank of clinical accessories used in a variety of those electrosurgical applications, such as grounding pads and also navigation electrodes used in electrophysiology and ENT applications. We're very active in the world of endoscopic access. We've got a significant play in a variety of sports medicine modalities. Wound closure is a very big business for us. And again, surgical navigation is an area that we've got a very unique portfolio of capabilities. So our team has really evolved over the past few years through a variety of strategic initiatives that include the organic development of some very innovative processes and workflows in terms of how we engage our customers through the development phase, including certain enabling technologies in the areas of sensing and navigation. And we've also made some very strategic acquisitions of market-leading capabilities that ultimately have helped us position as one of the market's most vertically integrated CDMOs.
We'll hear more from Mike Sanford a little later in the podcast. If you want more information about Nisha Medical Technologies, go to nishamedical.com. Nisha is spelled Nissha. Now time to start the podcast. Let's go. All right, you ready for this?
Ready.
All right, we're back, and we have Chris Newmarker back on the podcast. Chris, welcome back.
Newmarker's back.
Woohoo!
It's good to be here, Tom.
We're doing this on Wednesday because you're doing what tomorrow and Friday?
Well, in Minnesota, they close down the schools for a long weekend. So we have our MEA weekend, Minnesota Educators. I think it's Minnesota Education Association weekend here. So long weekend with the kids. Teachers are getting a long weekend. They're conference. They're learning how to better educate our kids. So
we are all about professional development here at Device Talks.
There we go.
That's what we'll be doing at our meetings next year. Boston, May 10th, 11th, Minnesota, June 6th and 7th, and Santa Clara, October 19th to 20th. Go to devicetalks.com.
Be there or be square.
For more information. Yes. That's. Can I use that one, Chris?
Yeah. Do it, man.
Yeah, that's a good one.
Get it on the t-shirt. When are we gonna get the merch, Tom? When are we gonna get the merch? Come on.
I know. I saw on our Slack channel someone else is talking about getting t-shirts, and I'm thinking we gotta push for some merch.
Gotta do it, man. Yeah.
All right. Well, You brought a whole bag of Newmarker's Newsmakers, and you brought Sean Whooley, associate editor of Mass Device as well. Hey, Sean.
Hey, good to be back.
Sean Whooley, you spoke with Megan Rosengarten of Medtronic. It's part of our episode focus on surgical robotics. Today, we're going to speak with Megan Rosengarten. We're going to talk with Ivan Tornos of Zimmer Biomet, which of course has ROSA, its robot, but is doing a lot more on digital surgery and other fronts as well. In fact, Ivan Tornos says that Zimmer Biomet is becoming a technology company, which is kind of a cool statement to make. So we'll bring you that interview a little bit later. And we're going to talk some robotics in the Newmarker's Newsmakers, aren't we, Chris Newmarker?
Oh, man, it's like Robotics Week on Mass Device. There is so much surgical robotics news this week.
All right, well, let's not keep our listeners waiting. What's number 5 on the Newmarker's Newsmakers?
Well, number 5 on the list, this ran in full on medical design outsourcing from our managing editor, Jim Hammerand, but it's about how, we had Intuitive Surgical earnings this week. They beat the street. The earnings call, there was a lot of insights about the supply chain problems that we're, seeing. And, their CFO, Marshall Moore, was saying that he, especially when it comes to semiconductors, he's hearing that the problems could persist into 2022. So, Intuitive, like leather, it's just like more evidence that, big medical device companies such as Intuitive are really keeping an eye right now on supply chains and, and how it's going to affect their business, versus consumer demand. I mean, they're not like raising a huge alarm yet, but I mean, it's definitely a problem.
Yeah, for sure. And I'll have to say, Jim Hammerand, the managing editor of Medical Design and Outsourcing, is reporting the heck out of these earnings calls. These are really robust reports on the calls, including.
It's awesome.
Yeah, he has CEO Gary Guthart talking about Medtronic's Hugo surgical robotic system approval in Europe, which is what Sean will talk with Megan Rosengarten about. So Gary Guthart repeated some of the comments he made on our first Intuitive Talks podcast, which folks can find on DeviceTalks.com. I feel like I'm doing a lot of pitching right now, but I'll slow that down.
I liked how Guthart in the article, the Jim wrote with, he quoted him saying that, over Hugo, that and the other competitors too. I mean, that there's, he said there's a fair number of claims about what these new systems will do. And I think the reality is time will tell.
Yep.
They're Gen 1 systems. I mean, do you think he was giving them a little shade? I mean, what do you think?
I don't think it's shade. I think that it was stated in an earlier podcast that it really pays to be first to market. And obviously Intuitive is first by a couple of decades. So it's but when you're first, you fail first, you learn first, you adapt quicker. So all of these other companies are going to have to, obviously they've probably brought people in-house who understand some of the challenges that Intuitive and others have faced. There's been a lot of surgical robot systems out in the market. But they're going to be out there for the first time with their own product, and they're going to learn what it can do and what it can't do. So,
yeah, exactly.
But he's being honest about it, I guess, rather than not commenting. He's commenting, and he's saying something that's hard to deny. So, yeah,
exactly. I mean, it's such a fascinating space right now. Yeah, Intuitive is dominated for so long, and now all of a sudden we've got these big companies such as Medtronic, J&J, and just a host of these smaller companies just looking to break in here and do something.
Absolutely, and of course, as I mentioned, Zimmer Biomet as well. They have some cool tech that's going along with their robot. We'll talk about that later on with Ivan Tornos. But all right, let us move on to number 4.
Oh, number 4 on the list, we've got a talking about ZB, we've got their former CFO, Tony Collins. He's joining a Salt Lake City-based company called Xenter as their chief financial officer. And this is a company that's developing new wireless medical device technologies and digital health tools. So there you go. I mean, Zimmer Biomet's like more and more saying that, they're a technology company, that they're, packaging, all these sensors and really neat tools into, the ortho space that traditionally wasn't as much like that. And, now their former CFO is, joining a, kind of a wireless medical device digital health company.
Oh, that is a convenient segue. And it does say something about medtech. I'm trying to recall the article or the study that MedTech Innovator did with Deloitte about medtech startups. And I think it was something like 70% of medtech startups had some sort of connectivity component to their products, like going forward. So it's going to be interesting to see where the lines blur between, or how the lines blur between medical technology and connected technology, because I don't think there's going to be much separating them.
I've written a lot of this here about, Zimmer Biomet and their smart knee implant that they just came out with. I mean, that's just what a wild technology. The idea that I could get a knee implant, there's a box in my house, and my knee implant's just going to talk to it and give all this data about how my knee's doing. And just who would have thought, I mean,
And we talked about that with Ivan Tornos later on in the podcast. We'll be talking about that in Device Talks. Device Talks Boston, May 10th and 11th. All right, I'll stop.
We got to stop talking. Come to Device Talks Boston if you want to find out more about this.
Well, before we hear from Megan Rosengarten of Medtronic, I'd like to bring back Mike Sanford of Nisha Medical Technologies. Mike, you're in a competitive CDMO space. What steps has Nisha Medical Technologies taken to really differentiate itself and its value proposition to medical OEMs?
So, Tom, it's honestly a very good question, and it's one that often keeps me up at night. Ultimately, our goal has always been to provide best-in-class speed, quality, and value. And to be honest, we've invested very heavily to onboard some of the most relevant technologies and capabilities. And we've also been very focused on developing a team that's both committed to the mission and also a team that's able to collaborate freely and effectively. So for us, value has really come from our ability to combine a really strong bench of engineers and designers with our vertical integration that really we find in a lot of the majority of the complex handheld and robotic assist devices that we work on. And from a vertical integration perspective, it really includes the complex cable assemblies, precision molding, and most recently, we integrated metal machining capabilities after acquiring a production facility from one of our large tier 1 OEM partners. From a contract manufacturing view, we offer a very scalable platform supporting everything from low to high volume work cells that also include highly manual processes to fully automated processes. So really that full span of capabilities. We've been very successful at leveraging the depth and breadth of these capabilities to be more nimble than some of our larger competitors, but we also offer significantly greater vertical integration and scale compared to some of the smaller companies.
That's great, Mike. Thanks. We'll hear a little more from Mike Sanford of Nisha Medical Technologies a little later in the podcast. All right, now would be a good time to bring in our interview with Megan Rosengarten of Medtronic. Sean, you interviewed Megan. How did you come to line up with her and talk about Hugo?
Genuinely, our good friend Jim Hammerin got an email. They were looking to, they got European approval. I believe it was last week was that when it was announced, and they were excited to talk about it. So the stars aligned, and I was able to chat with the president of the whole shebang over there. So the robotics. So yeah, it was really interesting learning about what Hugo does exactly, what the different components of it are, because I'm not a professional, nor am I a robotics expert. Therefore, I don't know much about it. I know as much as I can anyway. So, but she helped enlighten me as to what Hugo does, and it was really interesting. Got to learn as much as they can share about what the future holds for it too. There's still a lot. It doesn't have FDA approval yet, but they're working on that too. So.
Well, we'll break the interview just into two parts. The first part is a small part, and here Megan Rosengarten tells us sort of about the origin story for Hugo and how it started at Covidien under a very interesting name. So let's listen.
Prior to Covidien being acquired by Medtronic, I had started in the minimally invasive surgical space around 2008. I almost 2008, it was a while ago, when I joined Covidien, and I had come previously from Johnson & Johnson with a focus there in both medical devices and consumer products at J&J. And so did a number of things that were, again, focused on minimally invasive surgery, including at a time when we were assessing the role of robotics in minimally invasive surgery. And this was back around 2011. When robotics did exist for soft tissue surgery, was still very, very nascent. And we were taking a look at what we thought the role of that technology in terms of patient impact, and namely continuing to drive procedures from an open approach to a minimally invasive approach. And so I was at the forefront of sort of with others of thinking around, is that a space that we want to invest in? And we decided, yes, that's the punchline there, not a surprise, right? And we started around 2012 in earnest, putting together an incubator. And it was an incubator that at that time we called Project Einstein. And I had the honor to be a part of that, of creating that group and that incubator in Covidien. And we were very focused on, again, bringing to life a combination of robotic technology, data and analytics and that computational power and kind of what could we do with that. So if you fast forward now to today, that's what this operating unit was born from, was that original incubator within Covidien. And now we're one of the 20 operating units within Medtronic, and I lead this business as the president here today. So that's sort of a little bit of the origin story and the why we were focused on that and my journey, I guess, through that.
All right, in this next clip, Sean, you basically asked Megan to introduce the Hugo robot.
So I think the easiest way to think about Hugo, it's a robotic assisted surgery system. And we talk about it as being focused on soft tissue surgery. Soft tissue as opposed to hard tissue, which is bone for the most part. So that's kind of the way to think about that soft tissue nomenclature. And for Hugo, that system is designed really for anything that falls into that soft tissue space, organs, et cetera, really between neck and pelvis. That's kind of how to think about it. So that's what it was designed for. And examples of specialties or indications for that are things like urology, which an example procedure would be a prostatectomy, or gynecology, and an example procedure, a hysterectomy. So that's sort of roughly the space that it sort of designed for. And then the system itself is made up of several components. So I'll kind of walk through what those are. But you've got a surgeon console. And a surgeon console is typically going to be in the operating room where the patient and the operating room staff and the surgeon are. And you have that console, and that's where the surgeon sits and where she can see what's going on inside the patient body, as well as what's going on in the operating room. It's an open console, so you can look around and view, and you have a screen that's 3D that is inside the patient body. So you're viewing things, and also that surgeon, that's where she's driving the robot. So where she's using hand controls in order to manipulate instrumentation that is inside the patient body. That's kind of the console. And then you're going to have, with the Hugo system, you have independent robotic arms. So these are individually mounted on carts, and you'll have arms that are around the operating table and around the patient. And those arms are very flexible in terms of how you configure them, how you set them up. And the number one thing that they're doing is they're holding surgical instruments, which are inserted into the patient body. And those arms and the instruments they're holding are driven by that surgeon back at that console. Again, usually in the same room, but removed from the operating room table, right? And so that brings us to then the instruments are another important part of the system, that you've got what we call articulating or wristed instruments that mimic the movement of the surgeon's hands at the console. So what the surgeon is doing, these instruments have that same degree of freedom, like a hand inside the body, and are performing the surgical tasks as guided by the surgeon. So you've got console, robotic arms, instruments, and then you have this thing that you'll hear called the tower, the surgical tower, sometimes robotic tower. And what is in that, you can kind of think about it as the brains and the nervous system for the robot, in that it's got some pretty key components like the visualization system. It's also got quite a few processors, computing systems that are in there that are analyzing and providing data to the system itself, but also to the operating room staff that are there. So you've got a screen, and they're providing information on that tower.
Yeah, so obviously now the recent news is that Hugo earned European approval. So I guess what, as far as a step forward, what does that look like for you? How big is that? I know you were expecting it, so it's not like it's a surprise or anything. You obviously put in the work over the regulatory timeline, but how does it move Hugo forward?
Yeah. You're right. Not a surprise, but also still awesome, right? And it feels good. And I think the piece why this is really exciting for us actually does go back to that kind of origin story of how we started this with the Project Einstein, and that idea of the belief that robotic technology could bring quality, minimally invasive care to more patients, right? That sort of idea, because when you look at Europe, despite being obviously very developed market in most countries, it's still really, really early on for robotic adoption. So about 2%, that's 2% of procedures done robotically in Europe today. So we kind of look for places where there's an appetite and an ability to access technology and a pent-up need to improve patient care by driving more procedures to a minimally invasive approach. That's a sweet spot for our belief that we think that we can benefit patients by bringing more minimally invasive therapies to them. So that's one of the reasons that it's like, wow, this is a big deal, to be able to get access to the market and impacting patients within Europe.
It's limited, but do you know where Hugo will be kind of rolled out to start within Europe CE Mark accepting countries?
Yeah, I do. Yeah. Yes. I can't share, for confidentiality or customers and things like that as to where that's going to be. But it is, fair to say that we have a lot of hospitals and customers and surgeons who have partnered with us throughout this journey, because we started with talking to surgeons and hospital administrators around the world, even 9 years back, to say, hey, one, do you believe in the benefits of robotic assisted surgery? Largely, yes, but, sort of check that. So then why haven't you adopted it yet? And that's really where we focused in on talking to them, understanding the barriers to adoption, and then creating solutions to overcome those barriers. So in that journey, we've built a lot of partners that have been, hand in hand and developing the system and bringing it to life. So it's safe to say that we have a lot of those kind of important partnerships and lined up, and people who are hungry, to be the first to use the system. So yes, I know that was a little bit of a roundabout answer.
That's fun. And you mentioned 2% adoption. What does that, if you can share, what does that compare to in the States?
So I can compare to globally, it's about 3%, and it is the U.S. that is bumping that up. So. Right. By far, the most penetrated market for robotics is the United States. And
so if there is anything you can share on the FDA timeline for getting Hugo approved here, what can you share on that?
Yeah, so I can share the what I know. And so we submitted for our IDE approval back at the end of March of this calendar year. And we did receive that approval, which was great. So we now have that. And so what that means is we can now start our US clinical trial, and we're focusing on urology first. And so what you can expect is to hear more from us on what we've called our Expand Euro trial. And we'll start that clinical trial, and can't give you the exact dates, and are working on that because some of it is dependent to our partners and institutions that are going to do that trial. But you can start to expect to hear from us. We've started that trial, started to enroll patients. So that needs to happen. All of the patient enrollment, all of the successful procedures, and we package up the data from that clinical trial and submit that to the FDA. Then they have their allotted time for review, and then that comes back as an approval. So that's the steps, at least, in that process.
Yeah. And without, obviously, you can't predict the future, and you may not want to say it just so it's not, doesn't change down the line. But is there any idea of, next year, the year after? Is there any map?
I don't have a thing I can share with confidence around that, because so much is understandably
right,
sort of not predictable, right, of all of those steps that have to take place in order to get that approval. What you can expect is, while we're doing this, we're also collecting data around the world. So we have a global clinical data registry that every one of our first partners and first customers are enrolled in, where we're collecting the patient data from all of these procedures. And we do that, one, to learn, right, and on about these systems, but also to compile data that will be used for subsequent regulatory submissions. So this first one is urology, as we talked about. We also have gynecology in parts of the world approved. And then we'll continue with the other indications for things that are, again, think of it between neck, chest, abdomen, pelvis indications for the product. So you'll hear more news both US and elsewhere as that progresses.
Yeah, that was my kind of final note was, is there anything what other indications are you looking at, if you can share that? Obviously innovation just continues to happen, I'm sure. So what are you looking at specifically in terms of where Hugo goes next?
And it is pretty broad. Again, not being coy, it's fair to think about that of general surgery, thoracic surgery, bariatric surgery, in addition to urology and gynecology, is what the system was designed for. So now it becomes the stepwise process of generating the evidence that shows that the system is applicable for each of those indications and submitting that and receiving the regulatory approval. So you can think about it in that way. It's not always that sequential, but that's probably the best way to kind of think about it. But the system was designed for very broad use across those.
Great. Well, that's all I have for prepared questions. Was there anything you thought you would touch on or wanted to mention?
I think the only other thing it's not a you didn't ask, but maybe that I didn't weave in or share is we do have this product called Touch Surgery Enterprise that is one of the components. So when we were talking through the building blocks or components of the system in that tower that we talked about is a little bit of the brains. There is a product called Touch Surgery Enterprise, which we actually launched last year. And it's applicable for, Hugo, and sits on the Hugo Tower, but it's also applicable across any laparoscopic surgery or robotic assisted surgery of another vendor. And it's, in its simplest form, the team will cringe because I overlay person this, but it's just this really, really slick surgical video management solution. So it's automatically recording surgical video and then providing that in the cloud. So there's easy access for surgeons or OR staff on their mobile device to go back and look at what happened during that surgery. If they want to go back and review a certain step, or if they want to share something with patients or elsewhere, or if they want to use that footage for training of residents and other surgeons, it's a really nice tool. So that's something that we're getting really great feedback in the same way we are on Hugo when those initial cases have been performed.
All right, well, now we're back with Newmarker's Newsmakers. Chris, bring in number 3 on the Newmarker's Newsmakers list.
Well, number 3 is another story that's getting a lot of attention on a mass device, but this one ran in full-on drug discovery and development from our pharma editor, Brian Bunce, but it was about how the FDA is pausing its review of Moderna's COVID-19 vaccine for adolescents. And this comes because, there have been some regulators around the world that concluded that the risk of myocarditis is higher with Moderna's vaccine than the Pfizer BioNTech vaccine, though it's also worth noting that the risk of getting it is even higher if you get COVID. So, I mean, it's, but, at least for now, they're kind of, spending more time to review the Moderna data. And then, at the same time, Pfizer BioNTech, I mean, there's a advisory committee meeting expected by the end of the month that's, looking at, providing the Pfizer vaccine to kids 5 and up. So if there's going to be a vaccine that's going to be available to the kids, the little kids, it's going to be, it looks like Pfizer's the best bet for that right now.
Some school systems in Massachusetts, including the one my son is attending to, actually the entire state is asking school systems to survey their students. If they get the vaccination rate above 80%, they'll entertain removing the mask requirement. So
that'd be awesome. Something
to strive for. A little bit of normalcy. All right. What is number 2 on the list, Chris?
Well, number 2 on the list is there are some news reports. This is by I don't know if you've heard about this person, Sean Whooley.
Mm-mm.
He writes a little bit on our sites, but Sean here had a story about how there's some he basically writes most of the things on our sites. It's pretty awesome. But Sean, you had a story about how there's some news reports in Israel that Medtronic has entered in talks to acquire Triple Jump for $300 million. So that's at least what's out there right now. And Sean, tell us a little bit about what Triple Jump's about.
Yeah, well, Triple Jump is a startup based in Israel, and they develop a small insulin pump patch that is placed on the body and has, as we talked about, everything with connectivity, mobile connectivity, and it's they're looking down the line to include it in a future artificial pancreas platform as well. And the report from, I believe it's Calculus, I hope I'm pronouncing that right, they said that the investment that Medtronic made into triple jump in 2020 was made by Covidien, which Medtronic there have been investments before by Medtronic, most recently in 2020, and some of those investments were made by Covidien, which Medtronic now owns. So it's a whole kind of connected thing, but Medtronic is making a new insulin pump play, it seems.
I mean, I kind of recall previous earnings call where there were kind of suggestions they really wanted to up their game and, in the insulin pump space. They thought there was room for them to improve and compete more. And, this sounds like it's definitely part of that strategy.
It builds on the back of last month when they bought intellectual property relating to implanted infusion pumps from the Alfred Mann Foundation for Scientific Research. I thought that was an interesting move then. And now it seems that they're just kind of adding to their arsenal of insulin pump stuff.
Yeah. And of course, they had partnered with Blackstone, the private equity group that was going to invest in their diabetes business. So it's definitely an area where they see an opportunity for growth. So good stuff. All right, Chris, what is the big number one on the Newmarker's Newsmakers list?
Well, and the number one on the list, another really good one from Sean here, really jumped on this story. They J&J had their earnings this week, and in the earnings call, they said that they're going to be delaying the development of their Ottava robot by 2 years. And Sean, tell us a little more about that.
Yeah, so obviously when J&J kind of unveiled the surgical robot, the much anticipated platform from them almost a year ago, it was massive news. Everyone was excited. I believe they touted it as the next big thing. They were really proud of what they had produced. And but in their earnings call, some of the executives mentioned that some of their, expenses and charges, they're causing delays, and there's COVID-19 related disruptions, supply chain constraints that have led to a 2-year delay for the Ottava surgical robot platform. That changes from the earlier projections of the second half of 2022 when they would start pursuing some of the regulatory timeline stuff.
Sounds like there's not gonna be clinical trials in people until the middle of the decade at this point.
Oh, absolutely. We tried to get a few Wall Street analysts on to talk about it, but unfortunately weren't able to do it. But I did get a note from SVB Leerink, and the news was understated as at the end of the note. And it said on the product front, we'd argue the biggest incremental piece of news out of J&J is that the Ottava surgical robot is delayed 2 years and now expected in 2024 versus prior 2022 guidance. And then they cited this is due to both technical challenges and COVID-driven supply shortages. And of course, they see this as positive news for other robotic players, most notably Intuitive and Medtronic.
Exactly. I mean, here you have Intuitive's, dominated the space forever. Medtronic, I mean, they have the Hugo, just got European approval. And then, the Ottava, it looks like the Inhuman, the first Inhuman, trials is going to be delayed a few more years. So,
well, they've got an excellent team there. They got Fred Mall at J&J. So hopefully they'll find a way to right the ship and move things forward. Before we get into this keynote interview, I'd like to bring back Mike Sanford of Nisha Medical Technologies. Mike, we're talking a lot about the significant investments flowing into surgical robotics. There's a lot of competition out there. What should OEMs look for when selecting a development partner?
Tom, we've seen medical OEMs commit a tremendous amount of money and resources to the surgical robotics race. And, within that, we haven't always seen that equate to speed. So from our perspective, we really believe that medical OEMs can derive a significant amount of value in partnering with a company that has a meaningful level of experience in mechanical and electromechanical instrumentation type of devices that include very complex architecture within the device and also within the application itself. So one of the things that we've done at Nisha Medical Technologies to address those needs was to establish a series of development accelerator programs that we position subject matter experts in a leadership role to drive these programs within a very standardized process that allows the teams to operate very effectively and efficiently at the same time. And ultimately, what we've done through our accelerator program offering is deliver our customers very tangible results within a very tight timeline and also within a very palatable budget.
Thanks for joining us, Mike Sanford of Nisha Medical Technologies. And thanks to Nisha Medical Technologies for sponsoring this episode of the DeviceTalks Weekly Podcast. If you'd like more information, you can go to nishamedical.com. Nisha is spelled Nissha. Now let's begin this keynote interview with Ivan Tornos, the COO of Zimmer Biomet. Well, Ivan Tornos, welcome to the podcast.
Great to be here.
I'm excited to have Zimmer Biomet's story on the podcast. We've had you on once before, but it's going to be an excellent opportunity to get an overview of all you've got going on, and we have a lot of things to talk about. Before we roll into Zimmer Biomet, you've been in the medtech industry for a good long time. Tell us how you find your way into this business.
Sure. Thank you, Tom. And before I answer that, I just want to say that I'm a big fan of the work that you do, and I've listened to a few of the podcasts, and they're outstanding. So I hope I can continue that trend. But the short...
well, thanks very much for that.
The short answer, yeah, absolutely. The short answer, I've been in medtech my entire life. So I'm originally from Madrid, Spain, as you can hear in the funny accent. And right out of college, I went into consulting in healthcare. And then from then, I went into private equity in healthcare in Europe. And then 26 years later, I'm still in healthcare. I spent a great majority of time over at J&J in different roles around the world. Then with Baxter, Covidian, which became Medtronic, and then Bar, which became Becton Dickinson. And about 3 years ago, I joined Zimmer Biomet at a very exciting point, if I may add. First as a group president, and now as the president of the group and the chief operating officer. And I tell you, it's been nothing but a lot of fun. And I love being in healthcare. We get to solve problems every day, and I wouldn't change this profession and what we do for anything else. So it's great to be here.
And what was the thing that drew you to the sector initially? Was there a moment when you were considering a different path and chose this one?
Sure. Well, I'll tell you, it's probably a combination of purpose and luck. Purpose, I sadly have dealt with a lot of healthcare issues in my family life story. Not to get into a lot of emotional things here, but my father died when he was 45 and I was 5.
Oh my gosh.
My uncle became my father, and he died shortly after at the age of 45. And I had a brother that passed away at the age of 45. So disease,
oh my goodness,
terminal disease has been something prevalent in my life. I'm 46 years old, so I made it through that milestone. And that created a sense of purpose in my life, to be close to ways to remediate disease, to be part of the solution in changing the standard of care, and to help patients, quite frankly. So that's the purpose part. The luck part is that I interviewed for a job in a non-healthcare industry role straight out of college, and they rejected me. And plan B was working at a private equity environment, which they didn't reject me. And 27 years later, I'm glad that I failed that interview.
That's an amazing story. It's a horrible coincidence about your father, uncle, and brother. I mean, I'm sure that stays with you every day. And I'm not trying to go elicit any sort of emotional response, but it must impact to a great degree how you live your life.
Daily. Every single day, I think about the fact that we truly are impacting people that likely we will never get to meet or know. But in those long days, and I had a long day, probably the last 470 nights with COVID and everything in between. When I go to bed, that sense of purpose, that sense of knowing that I'm helping somebody, that I'm helping a patient, we are helping a patient, is something that gives you the energy for the next day. So I don't think you can do this job well without having some sort of sense of purpose. In my case, it's very acute because of my family dynamics. In other cases, maybe other reasons. But if the patient caring is not at the forefront of what you do, you are never going to be successful at this job. You cannot fake it. So absolutely.
I think that's well said, and I think people don't outside the industry don't really appreciate how much the patient actually factors into a lot of decisions that are made. But let's talk about your role at Zimmer. I want to get into all you have going on. There's a lot of exciting projects. But as Chief Operating Officer, please tell me what defines your role. What are your responsibilities, and how do you work with the CEO, Brian Hansen?
I would say there are pretty much 4 key areas that I work daily upon, and those are strategy, operations, culture, and innovation. And let me give you just a couple of things on each. On the strategy front, which I like to think that is 90% of my time, these days is probably less with COVID and all the urgent stuff, I am tasked to transform the company with a group of people from being what historically has been, Tom, a metal and plastic company, to being what we call a customer-centric solutions leader. We want to move from selling implants to solving problems. And as you know this space very well. We got all kinds of problems in orthopedics, whether it is the outcomes not being what patients deserve, whether it is the inefficiency in the surgical episode of care, whether it is just the overall high cost that still you see in the episode of care. I can go on and on. We want to be a solutions leader in solving those problems through our technology, through our implants, through our data, and other elements of our ecosystem. So that's vector number one. When it comes to operations, I pretty much think of myself as the person responsible to make sure that we drive a very efficient operation here at Zimmer Biomet. We got 23,000 employees across 125 different countries, all kinds of priorities. I want to make sure that we run Zimmer Biomet globally like a startup. I want us to move with the speed that I know we can move in or at. I want us to act like a startup. I've seen that happen in other large companies, and I think of myself as the person that is going to induce that speed in the way that we operate with everything associated with the operation. When it comes to P&L management and all the different other areas in how we execute. The third one, which is probably the most important one, is culture and talent. I like to think of myself as a global cheerleader of the company, as someone who daily is inspiring this notion of winning every day in the marketplace for patients primarily, but also obviously for us here at Zimmer Biomet. I spend a large amount of time ensuring that I'm meeting people that can join the company, develop people, as well as hiring people, and really driving the message of why we do what we do. We're really talking about our mission, alleviating pain and improving the quality of life for people around the world. So in that culture bucket, I will tell you that I like to spend as much time as possible. And then the fourth and final area of responsibility is innovation, which is very exciting. We've gone through some challenges in the past. I'll tell you the last 3 years, innovation-wise, have been phenomenal. We're going to be launching close to 50 new products over, let's call it the short to mid-term, so I don't give you too much information here. We have moved our R&D investments from implants to technology. As a matter of fact, 70%, Tom, of all the money that we invest today is in robotics, technology, and applications beyond the implants. So those are my 4 key areas of responsibility: strategy, operations, culture, talent, as well as innovation.
That's remarkable. Yeah, let's focus on innovation for a moment. I wanted to ask about a recent hire that was announced, and I'm not sure if I'm pronouncing the name correctly. I'm sure I'm not. Nitin Goyal, who is excellent. Who is your new innovation officer role? It's the Chief Science, Technology, and Innovation Officer role. And what was interesting is he came over from he was Chief Medical Officer and Senior VP of Innovation and Digital Care at Rally Health, which was part of United Health's group Optum business. So it was very much not an orthopedics hire. Obviously, it was a medical hire. But what role will Dr. Goyal have there, and what does the creation of that position mean to the point you just made about your commitment to innovation? Yeah,
absolutely. And I got to be careful what I say about Nathan here, because he's got a very big ego. And if I start saying all kinds of nice things, his ego is only going to get larger. But on a serious note, this has been a great addition to the team. So Dr. Goyal, as you mentioned, is somebody who's got a very unique background, because obviously he's a surgeon, an orthopedic surgeon at a very prestigious clinic, the Anderson Clinic outside of DC. Rothman orthopedics guy, but also somebody who understands the business side of things. He's created 2 companies. He sold 2 companies. He's someone who understands how business are run. He's just an amazing individual. In terms of the role, he is going to be the main architect of this transformation of that I just mentioned, moving from products to solutions. We have tasked Nitin, Dr. Goyal, with the main responsibility of organically and inorganically looking for sources of revenue associated with the problems we're trying to solve. How we deliver a much better outcome via implants and other solutions. How do we reduce or improve efficiency in the operating room? And he knows all about that, because he's somebody who's done a lot of orthopedic procedures. What are opportunities for us to engage better with other stakeholders, the providers, the payers? How do we accelerate design of the different solutions, et cetera, et cetera? So I could give you a very long speech here, but I'll tell you, he's the main architect of this transformation. And frankly, I don't think you could find just a better individual for the role. A business guy, a surgeon, and someone who was a customer, and is the creator of the solutions for those customers.
Interesting. No, and it certainly is a consistent part of this story, or it holds up to the rest of the story. And that I'm impressed at how in reviewing for this interview and all that's gone on in the new products and systems you have at Zimmer, that it is sounding more like a tech story, and I guess I'm feeding into your position with that. But between the robotics and the ZBEdge and Persona and things we'll talk about right now, it's sounding less like an orthopedics company and at least more like a hybrid of tech and orthopedics. So I'm guessing that's how you see things as well.
100%.
So let's get into those different areas. Let's start with Persona. You had some news there recently. This is an area where, first, before I go any further with my planification, talk a bit about Persona. What does it bring to the orthopedics channel?
Yeah, absolutely. So I'll start with a disclaimer that I'm still slightly hungover from the celebration party yesterday here in New York City. At HSS, we inserted the very first smart implant in the world of orthopedics, and I say that with a lot of pride. The very first smart implant, only FDA-approved implant in orthopedics, and that is PersonaIQ. What is it? I guess the simple way to describe this is our own Persona implant with a sensor, with a proprietary implantable sensor from a company that we have a great partnership with, Canary Medical. That sensor goes into the tibial extension of the actual implant, and post-surgery, it starts to measure things. And what you measure is going to be highly scalable. Right out of the gate, we measure things like range of motion, step count, walking speed, the quality of your walk, what we call gait metrics. But beyond that, down the road, it's gonna start measuring many more other things. We strongly believe at some point, not in the so distant future, we can measure things such as movement of the implant, potential risk of infection, temperature, and many other things that it will take me an hour to describe. Mm-hmm. The fact that you have now a sensor that stays in the actual implant for 20 years plus is going to also feed data not only to the patient, but in terms of overall performance in those dynamics that I just mentioned. It's also going to feed data to the actual physician. And just keep in mind today, Tom, the way you do that is, you go and you follow up with your physician. They ask you, how you doing? How's your range of motion? Are things working out? All that is gone. Now the physician is going to get all that data. And the data is going to be able to compare how the patient is working out post-surgically versus how the patient was functioning pre-surgically, through other conduits like mobility, another application that we got here at Zimmer Biomet with Apple. The physician is going to get data now on multiple patients. She or he is going to be able to know, what is the right implant at the right time for a certain individual. That is highly scalable. Now you start talking predictive analytics and all kinds of other stuff. So it's very exciting. I could talk for an hour, but I will tell you is that this really does solve a problem for that patient, for that physician. And then the last thing I'll say here, and I'll be quiet here for a second, also for the provider. Think about the impact of collecting that data and be able to tell a provider, in this case, let's just think, HSS here in New York City. This is how patients will respond to a certain implant with certain conditions. This is what's going to happen in terms of overall performance 30, 60, 90, 15 years later. So I find that to be truly transformational.
It's interesting is in covering orthopedics for a while, and when robotics first sort of came into orthopedics, there was a belief that the large joint implants for orthopedics were already wildly successful, and you don't really need to improve on that 95%, 97%, whatever they said was a success rate. Now we've moved into an ability to track the performance of these implants, provide all this data. Why is this data important is my first question. And my second question is, how do you ensure that the data is accessed, monitored, and used by the physicians primarily, I guess, because they're accustomed to asking the patient, how's it feeling? Are they accustomed to tracking data and checking the data that comes from the sensors? How do they come to use data in their everyday lives?
Yeah, absolutely. So let me just start by saying that you're right. Overall joint survivorship, efficacy of implants is fairly high, especially compared to other industries that I worked at. In the 90-95% in some cases joint survivorship. That said, still 1 out of every 5 patients post-surgery is not satisfied with the implant. Could be expectations, it could be the wrong implant, the wrong technique, or a combination of factors. So just know that we still have a gap there. Not to mention that, even if 5% of patients are not satisfied, that's 5% too much, or maybe 20% if you use the literature around overall satisfaction post-surgery. In terms of how our surgeons, your question, when I use the data and how do we make sure that they track the data and they leverage the data, if I understood the question correctly. So the patient and the physician will have access to that data. And again, right out of the gate, things that I as a surgeon can do with the data, I can understand range of motion right after the surgery, working well or not, level of physical therapy that you as a patient told me to engage upon. With that data, I can understand what is the potential risk of readmission. With that data, I can understand potential complications. And again, going back to later, and later not being years from now, you can get already alarm bells. Is that implant moving, which is going to cause infection and other problems? What's happening with the patient? And that's done in a very passive way. It's no longer you reporting how you feel, which is a very subjective type of answer. It's very quantitative data points in terms of how biomechanically your implant is moving, and data, as a surgeon or not, do a good job. What to do with the data later on? Some of the things that I mentioned earlier. You can start to really think what is the best time and the best implant for a given patient. You can start getting into all kinds of predictive analytics in terms of redesigning implants. What are things that work or don't work? You can get into all kinds of data, as a physician. And again, as I mentioned already, as a provider, it does really help you monitor in a very proactive way, start to forecast your expenses in a given hospital. What percentage of cases will, equal to a certain amount of money? What is the, readmission rate associated with certain implants, et cetera, et cetera. So highly scalable.
And I suppose if you demonstrate how essential this data is, then the implants that don't provide this data, that don't have the sensors, will not compare well to Zimmer Biomet.
That is a strong hypothesis, know. And again, these days everybody's talking about data. And I guess that's why you're asking the question: what's the usefulness of this data? Mm-hmm. And again, our hypothesis here is that we're going to be able to know what are early complications. We're going to be able to understand best time for the right implant for the right patient. We're going to be able to really control, what's the overall episode of care duration. We're going to be able to, again, down the road, lower readmission rates associated with infection, which is extremely expensive. It's extremely rare, low single digit, but when it does happen, it's extremely, extremely expensive, not to mention that it can be mortal for a patient. So those are some of the indicators that you're going to be able to get through the data.
Excellent.
And I'll finish with just one comment here. You can also link the data post-surgery now for the first time to the data pre-surgery. Right now through My Mobility with Apple, which is a patient engagement tool, you can understand how the patient is behaving pre-surgery. But until yesterday, there was no way to understand how the patient truly, in a very accurate way, is performing post-surgery. Now you got the entire episode of care. What's happening to the patient before, what's happening to the patient during with robotics such as ROSA, and then now for the first time, what's happening to the patient after. And by the way, how is that compared to the early stages of the episode of care?
Now we move into the ZBEdge part of the story. Is ZBEdge? Talk a bit about what it is, and is this sort of the platform where all of this data it makes sense and is presented in a way that makes sense for physicians and payers and anyone else who's monitoring?
Yeah, absolutely. So ZBEdge, the simple way to describe it is for ecosystem of solutions. Going back to not being a metal and plastic products only company anymore, ZBEdge encompasses all kinds of solutions. Obviously, best-in-class implants, hips, knees, shoulders. We have the leading position across all three of those. Number one knee company today. I say that proudly and factually. Number one in hips and number one in shoulders. But beyond that, we got robotics in different categories. We got now smart implants as of yesterday. So the combination of all that is what we call a ZBEdge or ecosystem of solutions. What makes ZBEdge unique is that every single component of this ecosystem either gathers data or feeds data. Mm-hmm. Other people talk usually about an ecosystem, in my view, the wrong way, just as a category or as a bundle. We believe that our ecosystem is unique because it truly is not an end-to-end solution, a category play, but rather what I call an in-to-in solution. Pieces and parts are truly feeding one another in the true definition of an ecosystem. And by the way, I failed biology 101, so maybe I'm not describing that correctly, but I think you get the point. And PersonaIQ is the latest component of that ecosystem, or that ZBEdge,
And how does ZBEdge present to the world? What does it look like? Is it a dashboard where someone can collect or see all of the data that's being collected? Is it merely sort of a network that you've identified and that you're using the term for marketing to kind of identify? What does ZBEdge actually look like to someone who's using it?
Yeah, absolutely. So I'll start by saying that you got great products in ZBEdge. I know when you start talking ecosystems and all kinds of data, it becomes very blurry, borderline science fiction-like. So let me just start with the fact that ZBEdge does have amazing implants, the leading category implants, which our surgeons use, every single day. Those get augmented by the data capabilities around the implant. Those get augmented by the fact that we're able to feed through robotics data intra-case to that surgeon to see what is again the best implant, how is the implant going to perform, what is the anatomy of the patient, the biomechanics, all of that. So you're getting data compounded with the implants. You do get a dashboard. We call that Ortho Intel that has all kinds of dynamics again for that patient and the entire episode of care. So if I were to simplify the answer, I would say, what do you get as a patient, or what do you get rather as a physician? You get best-in-class implants with data that tells you how to best position those implants through smart robotics and whatnot, how to understand what's going to be the performance post-surgery with a combination of mobility and PersonaIQ, et cetera, et cetera.
And the final piece to the story is your robotic system. I feel like we should have almost started off with this. It's one of your bigger stories, but it fits nicely into what we have been talking about. Talk a bit about ROSA Robotics. You've got a lot of different applications for it. You're in knee, you're in hip, spine. You've got FDA. Talk about why where ROSA fits into the infrastructure we've been talking about.
Well, let me begin by saying that we're not a robotic company, and it's interesting these days. A lot of the questions we get from analysts and investors is about our robot versus somebody else's robot. I don't see myself as a robotic company. I see ourselves as a technology company. Mm-hmm. One of those ingredients in that ecosystem that I keep talking about is robotics. What I like about ROSA is that, again, it does feed, it does interconnect with the other parts of the ecosystem. Very excited about it, but no, it's not the one core component. It's one of a few, and the whole is what makes our company so exciting. That said, we got 4, as you mentioned, robotic applications today. We got the brain application, spine. We got knees and we got hips. Within knees, we got both the total knee arthroplasty indication or application, as well as the partial one. And then hip, we just launched about a month ago. It's going really well. The feedback has been great. It's going to sound like I'm bragging again, but we're doing very well. If you listen to Brian Hanson, or chairman and CEO, if you listen to Brian talk about robotics, we're doing really well. Surgeons seem to like the fact that with a very time-efficient application or robotic solution, we are CT scanless. The prep time is not something you need to worry about. High volume surgeons do like working with us in the ASC environment where time does truly matter because it's somebody's money. A surgeon, an owner, we believe we got a leading advantage in that space. So very, very excited about the application, the scalability, and what's coming, which is a lot.
How does the robotic system fit into the sensors and fit into the ZBEdge? Is it required is it a required element to access the full potential of those other 2 areas, or will you be selling the sensors and the implants that use the sensors to folks who don't use your robotic system, perhaps use another one, or perhaps they don't use any robotics at all?
Sure. No, it's not required. You can use all the components of ZBEdge individually. Mm-hmm. You can have a smart knee without, using a robot. You can have my mobility and not use, ROSA. So it's not required. I would say it's desired for the patient and the physician, mm-hmm. because, as I mentioned earlier, they complement one another. But no, the simple way to talk about this interconnectivity, the in-to-in that I mentioned earlier, think about you tomorrow going to see your surgeon. Sounds like your osteoarthritis is not what it needs to be. You're going to need an implant. Now, prior to your surgery, call it 90 days before, I put you on a patient engagement tool, which we call My Mobility, that is really going to tell you and the physician and the care team how you behave. What is your mobility? What is your range of motion? What are you doing, not doing? It's going to teach you what to do prior to the surgery. All those data points are now going to that surgeon. And those data points, again, I'm simplifying this, are actually going, if the surgeon decides to use a robot, which again, I would, all those data points are going into the actual ROSA. Now, ROSA has all your information, knows how to guide the surgeon on the surgery, where to cut, where not to cut. What is the right amount of cutting that needs to take place, given your functionality, your biomechanics, as I mentioned earlier. And now, once we suture you up and you go home, the combination of the PersonaIQ and the data you're getting is going to continue to feed information to that surgeon that is going to compare how Tom was doing prior to surgery, how Tom is doing after surgery. So that is true interconnectivity. And by the way, all that data gets uploaded into a dashboard, which we call Ortho Intel. So do you need to have all those pieces together? No. Would I like, if I'm Tom and I got that knee implant, would I like to have all those pieces working together? Yes, because I'd love to have as much data in the hands of my caregiver as possible. And I personally would like to have as much data as possible so I understand what's working and not working with the new implant that I just got.
Excellent. Well, let's sort of look ahead. I mean, we've explained how you open this up saying that that Zimmer Biomet is as much a tech story as it is an orthopedic story, and I'm obviously paraphrasing you there. What's gone into changing the culture at the company to have your employees feel that way? Because I'm sure there's still some strong legacy feelings toward being in orthopedics, and you clearly that's the industry you function in. How do you change that culture, and where do you see things going forward? Do you see yourself the pendulum swinging more towards tech, and what does Zimmer Biomet look like in 4 or 5 years?
Yeah, absolutely. Let me start with the final question. Zimmer Biomet is going to be the boldest medtech company in the world, and that's not a hyperbolic statement. We've made a very strong bet in making sure that is the vision. We want to be boldest. How do you define boldest? We want to be number one in solving the problems in orthopedics. We want to drive the most efficient surgery with the best outcome, the safest outcome for the patient. And we want to make sure that we do our job when it comes to lowering the cost of care. So that's how we define being the boldest. I envision 5 years from now, 2026, January 1st, Thursday, January 1st, 2026, to be more concrete, people will look back and they'll say, these guys really did become the problem solvers, the customer-centric solutions leaders in orthopedics. So that's the end of the movie here. And to align to that movie, we're going to continue to look for all kinds of opportunities within technology, within data, within process excellence, while we continue to innovate best-in-class devices. So that's the end of the movie. How do we align the culture of the organization to that? Well, look, orthopedics well, right? One of the things that is striking about orthopedics, and I used to work many years ago in orthopedics, and here I am back, is that things change slowly. They really do, for X, Y amount of reasons. How do we make sure that we move our culture in that direction of being the boldest medtech company in the world? It's a combination of really explaining the why every day to an organization, to our salespeople, to educate our sales team on the fact that no longer an implant is going to be the way to solve a problem. That's just part of the solution, but it's not the only solution. It's really training. We do a lot of training. We are certifying every single one of our reps. We got thousands of them in terms of why robotics and technology and data needs to be part of the selling solution. Training, development, hiring people that have done similar things in other areas that become mentors to the rest. And then ultimately, I think people, by seeing the results, they'll jump on the journey. What I will tell you, and I will move on to the next question here, Tom, is that the team, the organization, from a cultural standpoint, is fully on board with the journey that we have embarked upon. And I'll tell you that already from a cultural standpoint, today we have a totally different culture at Zimmer Biomet than we did just 3 years ago.
Great. And just last question, sort of more nuts and bolts in terms of growing as a company. Talk about a bit, if you would, the decision to spin out what's now being called ZimVie, Why was that essential? And what do you look to bring into the company in terms of acquisitions going forward? Or do you see innovative ideas coming through acquisitions of smaller companies? Do you see yourselves doing more partnerships like with Canary, or are you going to lean more heavily on internal things?
Yeah, absolutely. So ZimBee, the spin-off of our dental office-based technologies as well as spine business, is part of what Brian, or President, CEO, and Chairman has been talking about for the 4 years he's been here, active portfolio management. We owe it to our shareholders and to our customers to be really focused on those areas where we have truly the right to win, to truly be focused and be number one, if not number two in the category. And when you look at those businesses, for focus reasons, for other reasons, maybe they don't fit that criteria. You also, and by the way, they're going to be able to do that on their own, much better than being part of a company that today is, 90% something else other than dental, spine, and OBT. Mm-hmm. So it's focus and right to win, number one. Number two, you heard Brian probably also talk about the fact that we want to get into a higher weighted average market growth rate segments. Can't even believe that I can pronounce that. Categories that are growing faster. And as we think about that, we want to move from those areas to investments in surgical, extremities, trauma, technology, and other spaces. And I think that leads to the answer to your question. As we think about portfolio or business development, where do we want to be? Well, we want to be focused on areas that diversify us in different vectors. We don't want to be just an orthopedic musculoskeletal healthcare company. Point in case, the acquisition of A&E, which we did last year, the craniomaxillofacial thoracic business. Acquisitions that we're considering on external closure, acquisitions that we're considering from a different point of care standpoint in the ASC, acquisitions that we have done in sports medicine and other areas. And areas that, again, diversify Zimmer Biomet and get us into a higher, I'll try again, weighted average market growth rate segment. So that's what we're going to do. And that's what we're doing already. And it seems to be working out. Fantastic.
Well, Ivan, I appreciate the time you took. You've been on with us for a long time today, but you've had a great deal to talk about. We look forward to tracking your story. And thanks for joining us on the podcast.
We look forward to not disappointing. Thank you for your time.
All right, well, that is a wrap on this episode of the DeviceTalks Weekly Podcast. Sean Whooley, where can folks find you out there in Twitter and LinkedIn land?
You can find me on Twitter at Sean, SEAN, Whooley, WHOOLEY, WTWH. That is on Twitter. Sean Whooley, WTWH, and then Sean Whooley on LinkedIn. Feel free to connect.
And we never talked about Ted Lasso. We won't at this point because some people might not have seen it, but I did finally see that final episode, and it was good. It was good. A little surprising. That's
Gonna miss it.
I am too. I know. These short streaming seasons just kill me. It's like, you call that a season? 9 episodes? What is that about? Anyway, Chris Newmarker, are you a Ted Lasso fan?
I have not watched it, but it sounds like I need to.
It is up your alley.
All right.
Couldn't recommend it more.
Chris, you may be Ted Lasso yourself.
Wow.
What do you think, Sean?
There's a little bit of Ted in there. You got to get the mustache going. But
Chris Newmarker, where can we find you out there on social media land?
Hey, you can find me on LinkedIn, Chris Newmarker, just like a Newmarker. You can find me on Twitter at Newmarker. Always happy to chat with people. Excellent. And I am on Twitter at medtech Tom. I'm on LinkedIn, Tom Salemi, Salemi. Please tag us all when you share this on LinkedIn or Twitter, this episode. You can share it. You can subscribe to it. You can tell your friends about it. You can rank it. You can comment. You can do lots of things to help the podcast out. We certainly appreciate it. Folks who do subscribe get to hear it before anyone else. So be part of that very exclusive group. Subscribe on your podcast apps, including Apple, Spotify, Amazon, Google, and many more. So that's a wrap. Tune in next time. We'll have another great episode of the DeviceTalks Weekly Podcast waiting for you. Enjoy the fall.